"Young lady, where did you get that bracelet?" The voice cut through the noise of champagne glasses and murmured laughter. Every conversation in the Whitmore Foundation ballroom seemed to quiet, if only slightly, as the question hung in the air. Nia Lawson froze. Her hands trembled where she held the empty glass tray. For a second, she thought she had misheard. But then she looked up and saw the woman staring at her. Catherine Whitmore, the matriarch herself, silver-haired and elegant in a midnight blue gown. Her eyes, pale and sharp, were fixed on Nia's wrist. Nia's instinct was to hide her hand, to pull the tray close to her chest. But it was too late. The golden bracelet, the one her late mother had left her, glimmered faintly under the chandelier light. "It was my mother's, ma'am," Nia managed to say, her voice small, respectful, unsure why her words suddenly seemed to echo in that vast room. Catherine blinked, her posture tightening. "Your mother's?" she repeated, each syllable carefully measured. "And what was your mother's name?" The air seemed to thicken. Nia's fellow waitstaff had stopped moving. A few of the guests nearby turned curiously. From across the room, a tall blonde woman, Margaret Whitmore, Catherine's mother-in-law, noticed the exchange and began walking toward them with an expression that looked pleasant but felt like frost. Nia hesitated. "Lorraine, ma'am. Lorraine Lawson." Catherine's hand flew to her chest as if something invisible had struck her. For a moment, she looked unsteady, her breath shallow. Then, recovering herself, she gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's interesting," she murmured. "May I?" She extended a hand toward Nia's wrist. The old woman's fingers were cold, trembling slightly as they turned the bracelet to examine the inner engraving. Her eyes widened. The faint, worn letters were still there. "For always R.W." Her world tilted. That engraving had been her son's handwriting. Richard Whitmore, dead 23 years. Catherine released Nia's wrist as if it burned her. The tremor in her hand deepened. Margaret arrived, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Is there a problem here?" she asked smoothly, though her eyes darted from Catherine's pale face to the young black woman before her. "Nothing," Catherine said quickly, forcing her composure. "Just a curious coincidence." Margaret's gaze dropped to the bracelet. For a fleeting second, something flickered in her eyes, recognition. But she smiled as if amused. "Oh, Catherine, don't frighten the poor girl," she said lightly. "I'm sure you just thought you saw something familiar." She turned to Nia, her tone soft but laced with quiet authority. "Why don't you head to the back, dear? You've done enough here." Nia hesitated, confused, her heart pounding. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. Catherine's lips parted, as if to protest. Then she stopped herself. Her eyes stayed fixed on the bracelet, on the memory of a night she had buried deep inside her. The night her son Richard had handed that very bracelet to the woman everyone had sworn was gone. Lorraine Lawson. The name echoed through her mind like a ghost stepping out of a sealed grave. As Nia retreated toward the back hallway, the murmurs of the guests resumed, but softer, uneasy. Catherine stood still, gripping her champagne glass, her knuckles white. "Catherine," Margaret said under her breath, "you mustn't make scenes." Catherine turned on her sharply. "That bracelet belonged to Richard," she whispered. "It was made for him and Lorraine before." Margaret's voice sliced in, quiet but firm. "Lorraine died, Catherine. You remember that. You saw the papers. We all did." Catherine's eyes glistened. "I never saw a body. I only saw the bracelet. They said it had been lost in the wreck." Margaret's smile didn't falter, but her tone hardened. "Please, don't start this again. Not here, not now. It's just a coincidence." But Catherine wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was somewhere else. 20 years back, to the day her son's car was found crushed against a ravine wall. They said Lorraine had been in the passenger seat, that both were gone, that fate had punished her son for his mistakes. Yet the bracelet she had buried with her grief was now sitting on the wrist of a young woman who looked barely old enough to remember those days, and who carried Lorraine's eyes. Catherine turned toward the balcony, steadying herself against the rail as her vision blurred. The air outside was cold, but she hardly felt it. Margaret joined her after a moment, her voice low, controlled. You need to let this go, Catherine. Lorraine Lawson was a problem your son created, and life corrected it. This, she gestured vaguely toward the ballroom, doesn't mean anything. Catherine's lips trembled. If that girl is who I think she is. She isn't, Margaret interrupted. And even if she were, what difference would it make now? Richard is gone. The estate is settled. You have the family name to protect. Catherine's silence stretched long enough to feel like surrender. Inside, Nia sat on an overturned crate near the catering table, staring at the bracelet. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She couldn't explain what just happened, but something about that woman's reaction unsettled her deeply. The way she'd whispered, "Your mother's name?" It wasn't just curiosity. It was fear. She looked at the bracelet again, at the faded engraving she'd never really paid attention to. For always, R.W. her mother never told her what it meant. Every time Nia asked, Lorraine would smile wistfully and say, "Just a promise, baby." One that time couldn't keep. A tear slipped down her cheek. She remembered the night before her mother died, the way Lorraine had held her hand and whispered, "If you ever find someone who recognizes this bracelet, listen carefully. Don't let them scare you." Nia had never understood those words. Not until tonight. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Catherine Whitmore, standing in the doorway of the ballroom, watching her from a distance. Their eyes met for a single moment. The older woman's face was unreadable, a storm behind porcelain calm. Then she turned away and disappeared into the dark corridor. Nia exhaled shakily. She didn't know why, but she felt that something irreversible had just begun. That night, as the city lights blurred through the bus window, Nia held the bracelet tight in her palm. The faint initials pressed against her skin. Somewhere deep in her chest, a question began to grow, one that would not let her sleep. Why did a woman like Catherine Whitmore react that way to something my mother left me? And what secret had Lorraine Lawson taken to her grave? The night after the gala, the Whitmore mansion stood silent against the drizzle, its white stone walls glistening under the mist. Inside, Catherine Whitmore sat alone in her study, her hands trembling slightly as she sifted through a stack of old photographs. The room smelled faintly of old books and lavender polish. Every tick of the grandfather clock behind her seemed louder than it should be. She stopped at one picture. It was faded at the edges, a photograph from 2001. Her son Richard stood beside a young woman with dark, radiant skin and the softest eyes Catherine had ever seen. Lorraine Lawson. She'd worn that same golden bracelet, gleaming in the sunlight as Richard's arm rested protectively around her shoulder. Lorraine had been beautiful, yes, but she had also been trouble. That's what Margaret always said. Catherine stared at the photograph for a long time, her chest tightening with guilt and something she couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or the echo of something worse. The last time she'd seen Lorraine was in a hospital waiting room, 23 years ago. Lorraine was 7 months pregnant then, bruised from a car crash, barely breathing. Catherine remembered the metallic smell of antiseptic and the whispering doctors who refused to meet her eyes. They said the baby hadn't made it. They said the trauma was too severe. They said a lot of things Catherine never quite believed. She set the photograph down and reached for the phone. Her fingers hovered over the number of a private investigator she hadn't spoken to in years. She hesitated. What if she was wrong? What if that young woman, that Nia, was just another reminder of the past, a coincidence twisted by grief? But grief had never felt this specific. She dialed. Weston Investigations, came a groggy male voice. "It's Catherine Whitmore," she said quietly. "I need you to look into someone for me." Across the city, Nia sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment in Queens. The bracelet lay on the nightstand, gleaming faintly under the yellow light. She had scrubbed her hands 3 times since getting home, but she could still feel the weight of that ballroom, the eyes that had lingered on her, especially the older woman's. Catherine Whitmore. The name was familiar, though Nia couldn't place it immediately. She'd heard it somewhere, maybe on the news or on one of those foundation charity broadcasts her mother used to watch. She picked up the bracelet again, tracing the engraving with her thumb. Her mother had always been careful about it. Too careful. Lorraine would never let anyone else touch it. Nia had once asked why when she was about 8. Her mother smiled sadly and said, "Because some things aren't meant to be lost twice." Nia had laughed then, but now the words didn't sound like poetry. They sounded like warning. She turned to her nightstand drawer and pulled out a small wooden box that held her mother's few belongings. A faded scarf, a yellowed photograph, and an old hospital band marked Roosevelt Medical Center. June 2002. She'd never paid attention to it before, assuming her mother kept it as a painful memory. But now her fingers lingered on the date. June 2002. The same year Catherine had mentioned at the gala, when she muttered something about a wreck. A chill rippled through Nia's spine. 2 days later, Catherine's investigator called back. "I found her," he said, his voice clipped, businesslike. "Nia Lawson, 23, lives in Queens, works part-time catering and at a bookstore. No criminal record. Foster care until 18, then aged out." Catherine's pulse quickened. "Foster care." "Yes, ma'am. Records indicate her mother, Lorraine Lawson, died when Nia was about 1 year old. No known relatives." Catherine swallowed hard. "How did Lorraine die?" There was a pause. "According to the death certificate, she died in childbirth." Catherine's breath hitched. "That's not possible. I was there after the crash." "Ma'am." "Nothing," she whispered. "Go on." "The baby was supposedly stillborn," he continued. "But there's something strange. There's no burial record for the infant. No hospital confirmation beyond a handwritten note. Roosevelt Medical Center's archives from that period are incomplete." Her heart pounded in her ears. "Incomplete," she repeated softly. "Yes, ma'am. And another thing. The attending physician on both Lorraine Lawson's file and Richard Whitmore's death certificate was the same doctor." "Who?" "Dr. Gerald Thornton." Catherine's hand gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. Thornton, the man who had quietly resigned a year after the accident, before vanishing to Florida. She had always wondered why he'd left so suddenly. That night, Catherine sat in her bedroom, the house quiet around her. She placed the photograph of Lorraine on her bedside table next to a printed copy of Nia's file. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same cheekbones, the same hesitant smile. She hadn't felt her heart race this way in decades, a mix of dread and fragile hope. But as she stared at the photograph, the bedroom door creaked open. Margaret stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I knew you'd start digging again," she said quietly. Catherine didn't respond. Margaret stepped closer, her voice soft but edged. "You can't keep chasing ghosts, Catherine. Let the past stay buried. It's better for everyone." "Everyone?" Catherine's tone was sharp. "Or just you?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "Don't start with your accusations. You lost a son. I lost a grandson too. We all suffered." "You gained everything," Catherine whispered. Margaret's silence was damning. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Catherine's eyes lifted, glistening with quiet fire. "If that girl is Lorraine's child, if she's Richard's daughter, she deserves to know." Margaret's expression hardened. "You don't even know if she is. Don't you see what this could do? To the family name, to the company? To you?" Catherine's voice trembled, but not from fear. "To the truth." Margaret exhaled slowly, her calm returning like armor. "You always did love your tragedies, Catherine. But I'm warning you, this time you might not survive them." She turned and left, closing the door softly behind her. Catherine sat there for a long time, staring at the photograph of Lorraine and the bracelet shining faintly beside it. Somewhere across town, Nia was doing the same. She sat at her small kitchen table, the bracelet in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling through old news articles. It didn't take long to find it. Heir to Whitmore Industries dies in car crash, fiancé presumed dead. Her mother's name was in the second paragraph. Lorraine Lawson. Her stomach twisted. She scrolled further and found a photograph. Catherine Whitmore, younger then, standing beside a casket. Her bracelet, visible in the inset photo of the couple attached to the headline. Her world began to tilt. The bracelet she had worn her entire life, the one her mother had sworn to protect, didn't just belong to her family. It might have been stolen from it. She looked out the window at the skyline and whispered to herself, "What were you hiding, Mama?" The next morning, Catherine called her attorney. "I need access to Roosevelt Medical's archived delivery records from June 2002, she said, her tone steady but urgent. "Mrs. Whitmore," came the reply, cautious. "Those files are confidential. Unless it concerns my family," she cut in. And it does. As she hung up, she caught her reflection in the glass window. Eyes hollow, hair perfectly arranged, but something fierce burning beneath the calm. Catherine Whitmore had lived her life protecting an empire. Now she would burn it down for the truth. And across the city, a young woman who didn't yet know her name's worth had just typed Roosevelt Medical Center 2002 into her search bar. 2 women, 1 secret, and 23 years of silence cracking open. The morning sun spilled weakly through the stained windows of Roosevelt Medical Center. The building had aged badly. Cracks in its plaster, paint peeling off like dried skin. But its name still carried weight in old New York circles. The hospital of the elite, the quiet ones, the ones who could pay to forget. Catherine Whitmore stood at the reception desk in a dark navy coat, her gloved hands resting lightly on the counter. "I called yesterday," she said, voice calm but controlled. "I'm here for access to delivery records from June 2002. The Lawson case." The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, gave her a wary look. "Ma'am, those archives aren't digital. You'd have to file a request through administration." Catherine offered a small, polite smile, the kind that had opened boardroom doors for decades. "I understand, but I was told by your director that my family has special permission." She slipped an embossed envelope across the counter, the kind of envelope that said, "Don't ask questions." After a moment's hesitation, the woman nodded and disappeared through a door behind her. Catherine exhaled slowly. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled her lungs, bringing back flashes she'd buried deep. The smell of blood and smoke, her son's lifeless hand under a white sheet, and the sound of Margaret's voice telling her to let it go. She had tried. For 23 years she had obeyed, silenced by guilt and grief. But the truth had its own gravity, and she was done orbiting Margaret's lies. The clerk returned, holding a single paper folder. "Mrs. Whitmore? We found the file." "But," Catherine's voice sharpened. "But what?" "It's been sealed." Her stomach tightened. "By whom?" The woman hesitated. "Dr. Thornton himself." The records were marked confidential under family protection, per court order. Catherine's brow furrowed. "Court order?" "Yes, ma'am. Signed off by..." The clerk glanced at the page. "The Whitmore Foundation's legal division." Catherine froze. Her own company. Her heart pounded as she reached for the folder. Her name wasn't anywhere on the signature line, but the one below it was burned into her memory. Margaret Whitmore, the woman who had built her empire beside her husband's ashes. The woman who had told her to bury her grief. The woman who might have stolen her grandchild. "Thank you," Catherine murmured, forcing a smile. She turned on her heel and walked briskly toward the elevator, clutching the slip of paper like a weapon. When she reached the car, her hands shook so hard she could barely fit the key into the ignition. The envelope on the passenger seat gleamed in the sunlight. She wanted to scream, but instead, she whispered to the empty air, "Mother, what did you do?" Across town, Nia was staring at the same hospital's name glowing on her laptop screen. She sat cross-legged on her bed, the bracelet coiled like gold fire beside her keyboard. She'd barely slept since the night of the gala, haunted by Catherine Whitmore's reaction, that flicker of shock, of something close to recognition. Her search had spiraled into dozens of late-night rabbit holes. Hospital scandals, falsified records, lawsuits from the early 2000s. The name Roosevelt Medical Center kept appearing like a curse. She clicked on a forum thread titled, Infants missing after birth. No records. No graves. Dozens of parents wrote about stillbirths that weren't. Hospital cover-ups. Paid silence. Her pulse quickened. Scrolling down, she stopped at a comment dated 2003. We were told our baby didn't make it, but no one would show us a body. The attending doctor was Thornton. Roosevelt Medical. Thornton. The same name from the articles she'd read about Whitmore's car crash. Nia's heart hammered in her chest. She grabbed her phone and dialed the only person who might still know something. Mrs. Maid, the retired nurse who had helped raise her in foster care. The old woman answered after a few rings, her voice soft and cracked. Nia, sweetheart, it's been years. Hi, Mrs. Maid. Nia's voice trembled. Can I ask you something? Do you remember where my mom gave birth? There was silence. Long, uneasy silence. Finally, Maeve sighed. Child, some things are better left. No, Nia said quickly, her throat tight. Please, I need to know. Another pause. Then, quietly, Roosevelt Medical Center. June 2002. They said the baby died. But your mama, she never believed them. She came back a week later, begging to see the body. And they told her there was no record. No grave. Nothing. Nia's breath hitched. And you believed her? Maeve's voice softened. I did. Lorraine wasn't crazy, Nia. She was scared. Said someone powerful wanted her quiet. Someone, I don't know who, but she was terrified. The line went silent. Nia sat frozen, the hum of the city outside sounding distant and unreal. Her chest felt hollow, her thoughts spinning around one impossible word. Whitmore. She whispered to herself, What did they do to you, Mama? That evening, Catherine sat alone in her car outside the Whitmore Foundation's old Manhattan office. The sun had set, leaving the city painted in cold gold and shadow. She didn't bother going inside. She knew what she'd find. Layers of erased history, sealed documents, and her mother's fingerprints on all of it. Her phone buzzed. She answered immediately. Catherine, came a weary male voice. It's Leonard Briggs. I got your message. I need your help, she said flatly. Do you still have access to Roosevelt Medical's legal archive? Briggs hesitated. That's restricted material. And I'm retired. Please, Leonard. Her voice cracked for the first time. I think my granddaughter's alive. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then, meet me at the old Foundation library. Midnight. Catherine exhaled, the sound sharp and shaky. For the first time in 23 years, she felt like she was chasing something that could make her whole again. At that same hour, Nia stood outside Roosevelt Medical Center. She had told herself she was just there to look, to see the place where she'd supposedly been born. But standing under its flickering lights, she felt the pull of something deeper. The night air was damp, heavy with rain. She pulled her hoodie tighter and slipped through a side door left ajar. The corridors smelled of bleach and dust. Every footstep echoed. She passed empty nurse stations, framed photographs of smiling doctors, and doors marked authorized personnel only. Her breath came fast. Finally, she found the archive room. The door was locked, but when she pushed, it gave slightly. Someone hadn't closed it properly. Inside, the air was stale. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, each labeled by year. She scanned the rows until she found the one marked 2002, deliveries/confidential. Her hands trembled as she pulled it open. The file was thinner than it should have been, 2 sheets, maybe 3. At the top, Lawson, Lorraine, June 12, 2002. Nia's throat went dry. She read the document once, twice, disbelief spreading like ice in her veins. Infant deceased upon delivery. Mother informed. Remains handled per family request. But there was no mother's signature. No hospital witness. No burial confirmation. At the bottom corner, half smudged, she saw it. Whitmore. Her breath hitched audibly. Whitmore. She sank to her knees, the page shaking in her hands. Her vision blurred with tears. Her mother's accident. The bracelet. The way Catherine had looked at her. It all fit. She pressed her palm against her chest, whispering through trembling lips, "Oh God, it's true." Then footsteps. She froze. A beam of light cut across the boxes. "Who's there?" a man's voice demanded. The low, clipped tone of a night security guard. Nia panicked. She stuffed the file into her bag and darted toward the back door. The guard shouted after her, but she was already gone, breath ragged in the cold night air. Midnight. The Whitmore Foundation Library. The massive room smelled of old wood and forgotten secrets. Dust floated like ash in the moonlight. Catherine stood by the long oak table as Leonard Briggs entered, carrying a brown folder under his arm. He looked older, thinner. "You shouldn't have dragged me into this," he muttered. "Just show me." He sighed, setting the folder down. "I found the authorization record for June 2002. It wasn't a stillbirth, Catherine. There was an emergency transfer signed that same night." Catherine's stomach twisted. "Transfer to where?" He hesitated. "It doesn't say. The baby was moved before Lorraine Lawson died. And there's something else." He flipped the page toward her. 3 signatures stared back. Dr. Gerald Thornton, Margaret Whitmore, and one forged in her own name, Catherine Whitmore. Her breath left her body. "Dear God." Briggs nodded grimly. "Your mother orchestrated everything. The falsified death, the sealed file, the disappearance. She even used your signature to cover it." Catherine's hands shook. "She took my son's child. My blood. She protected the family legacy," Briggs said softly. Catherine's eyes burned with tears, but her voice turned cold. "She destroyed it." She closed the file slowly, her face hardening in the pale light. "She took everything from me once," she whispered. "She won't take my blood again." And somewhere across the city, a young woman clutching a stolen hospital file whispered into the night, "I'm going to find out who I am." Neither of them knew they were walking straight toward each other, and into the fire that had been waiting 23 years to burn. The night split open with thunder. Rain lashed against the windows of the Whitmore mansion like fists, and every crash of lightning threw the portraits on the wall into brief, accusing light. The great house, once a monument to old money and quiet dignity, now felt like a cathedral of ghosts. Catherine Whitmore stood alone in the foyer, soaked to the bone, clutching a folder so tightly that the rain had bled its ink into her skin. She had driven through the storm without a thought of safety. Every red light, every flash of lightning, because something inside her had broken loose, and there would be no peace until the truth was spoken aloud. Her voice cut through the silence like a scream from the grave. "Mother!" The echo carried through the mansion, up the staircase, through marble corridors that had seen decades of secrets buried under polished lies. Moments later, soft footsteps descended the stairs. Margaret Whitmore appeared, regal even in her silk robe, silver hair immaculate, a faint scent of lavender trailing behind her. Her calm was chilling, the kind of calm that could command empires and destroy families in the same breath. "Catherine," she said lightly, "you're soaked. What on earth are you doing here at this hour?" Catherine lifted the folder, rain still dripping from her fingertips. Her eyes, wide, red-rimmed, and burning, didn't blink. "You know why I'm here." A flicker passed through Margaret's eyes, brief, but real. Then she smiled, faint and practiced. "You've been digging again. Don't you dare patronize me." Catherine snapped, her voice trembling with a mix of grief and fury. "You forged my name. You falsified hospital records. You took my son's child and buried her alive in another life." The air went still. The sound of rain became distant, muffled by the weight of the words. Margaret didn't move. "Watch your tone." Catherine let out a hollow, bitter laugh. "Watch my tone? You made me bury my own peace for 2 decades, and you want me to mind my tone." She slammed the folder onto the marble table, papers spilling out like ghosts unbound. Birth certificates, signatures, receipts, hospital slips marked Roosevelt Medical Center, 2002. "You buried a living child," Catherine whispered, her voice breaking. Margaret's mask faltered. "You don't understand what was at stake." "Oh, I do," Catherine spat. "The Whitmore name, the company, the reputation, the The same poison you've used to justify every cruel thing you've ever done. Margaret's face hardened, but there was something trembling beneath the surface. Not regret, but fear. Your son was reckless, addicted. He was destroying everything we built. And then that woman, Lorraine, came along. She saw an opportunity, Catherine. She wanted his money, his name. Don't you dare, Catherine said, voice trembling. Don't you dare speak of her that way. She loved him. She ruined him, Margaret snapped. That child would have ruined all of us. That child was my blood. Catherine's cry echoed through the hall, shattering the last of the calm. She staggered a step closer, her eyes wet and burning. You told me she died. You looked me in the eye and swore she was gone. I did what was necessary, Margaret said quietly. You were falling apart. I did fall apart. Catherine's voice cracked. And you let me drown while you called it loyalty. For a long, raw moment, neither spoke. Only the thunder answered them. Then, headlights flared through the front gates. Catherine turned toward the window. A small car pulled up outside. Through the rain, a figure stepped out, clutching something close to their chest. The motion light caught her face for a heartbeat. Catherine's breath caught. Nia. Margaret followed her gaze, her composure flickering. Who is that? But Catherine didn't answer. Her body moved before her mind did, walking toward the door as if drawn by instinct. The heavy doors creaked open. Nia stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her hood, her eyes wide with hesitation. She looked small against the vastness of the mansion, but there was something unyielding in her stance, a quiet courage born of too much loss. Catherine froze when she saw her up close. The same eyes, the same softness around the mouth. The resemblance hit like a physical blow. Behind her, Margaret's voice sliced through the air. Who sent you here? Nia's fingers fumbled in her bag. My name is Nia Lawson. My mother was Lorraine. She gave birth here, at Roosevelt Medical, in 2002. I found records. Her voice faltered. I think someone lied to us. Margaret's tone turned icy. There are no answers for you here, Miss Lawson. You've made a mistake. But Catherine's voice broke through, shaking. Don't you dare lie to her again. Margaret turned sharply, her tone warning. Catherine. She deserves the truth, Catherine cried. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She's my son's daughter. The words hung in the air like thunder. Nia blinked, water glistening on her lashes. What did you say? Catherine stepped forward, trembling. You're Richard's child. My granddaughter. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The rain, the thunder, even breath. Nia stared, lips parted, the words refusing to make sense. No, she whispered, backing a step. That can't. Margaret's voice struck like a blade. Enough. You don't know what you're saying. Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying, Catherine snapped, tears spilling freely now. You lied. You let me mourn a living child. You let her grow up thinking she had no one. Margaret's composure cracked, her voice rising, brittle, sharp. And what would you have done? Raised her in this madness? Paraded her around for the press to tear apart? She was better off without this name. Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper that cut deeper than any scream. You don't get to decide that. Lightning flared white through the window, and in that flash, the three of them looked like reflections of the same soul. Youth, middle age, and the cruel weight of legacy. Margaret's tone turned venomous. You think she'll thank you for this? For dragging her into our rot? Catherine's eyes glistened with fury. She'll thank me for freeing her. Margaret's mask finally shattered. You fool. You have no idea what that girl is. What I had to do to keep her alive. Catherine froze. What do you mean? But before the question could find an answer, the side doors burst open. Two men in dark coats stepped in, private security, faces unreadable. Mrs. Whitmore, one said. We heard shouting. Margaret turned to them, voice sharp as command. Get her out of here. Don't touch her. Catherine shouted, stepping in front of Nia. The guards hesitated, glancing between the two women, power against defiance. Margaret's voice went cold. You don't belong here, girl. You were never meant to. Nia's pulse raced, her breath ragged. Something in Catherine's eyes, desperate, maternal, certain, told her what to do even before the words came. Run, Catherine whispered. What? Run. Now. Nia hesitated only a moment, long enough for blood to recognize blood. Then she turned and fled into the storm. Stop her. Margaret's voice tore through the hall. Catherine shoved one of the guards aside and yelled, Go! Thunder roared overhead. The doors slammed shut behind Nia. Margaret stood trembling. Not from fear, but from fury. Do you realize what you've done? Catherine's voice was quiet, but deadly. I've undone you. Margaret's eyes went cold and dangerous. Then you've chosen war. Catherine didn't blink. So be it. Another flash of lightning flooded the hall, freezing the scene like a photograph. Two women bound by blood and betrayal, standing amid the wreckage of their own empire. Outside, Nia ran through the downpour, clutching the soaked file to her chest. The rain doesn't stop. The truth has only begun to bleed. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt drenched in its aftermath. The sky hung heavy, gray and bruised, as if the heavens themselves had stayed awake through the storm to watch what unfolded inside the Whitmore mansion. By morning, the estate was quieter than a graveyard. The air smelled of wet soil and secrets finally disturbed. Police cars lined the long driveway, their lights casting cold flashes across the windows where power still flickered weakly. Catherine sat on the edge of the grand staircase, a blanket around her shoulders, her fingers still trembling. The hall that had once echoed with laughter and pride now buzzed with radio static and the low murmurs of officers cataloging evidence. Every corner of the mansion whispered guilt. Margaret Whitmore had been taken away not in handcuffs, but in silence, escorted by detectives, her face blank, her robe replaced by a dark coat that swallowed her whole. Yet even then, her chin was high, her pride unbroken, her silence deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence that spoke of shame. It was the silence of someone who had been caught, but not yet conquered. Catherine's eyes stayed fixed on the door long after her mother was gone. Her whole body trembled. Not from the cold, but from the strange, haunting truth that justice, when it finally came, never felt like triumph. She had won nothing back. Only the truth, and the truth hurt. Nia sat in a hospital waiting room across town, a sterile white space that hummed with the faint sound of rain dripping from her hair. She had collapsed at dawn, body shivering from exhaustion and shock, clutching a file so soaked that half the pages were unreadable. When Catherine found her again, hours later, she didn't know whether to run to her or fall to her knees. Nia looked up as the older woman entered, her expression caught between disbelief and anger. You told them? She asked, her voice small but edged with fear. I had to, Catherine whispered. It's over now. Over. Nia gave a bitter laugh. You call this over? My mother spent her whole life wondering why no one ever came for her. She died thinking she was nothing. You can't make that right with a police report. Catherine flinched at the words. I know, she said softly. And I don't expect forgiveness. Silence fell between them. Not cold, but heavy, like a truth too large for words. Nia finally turned to face her. Why didn't you come for me? Catherine's breath caught. Because I thought you were dead. The words broke like glass. I buried an empty casket, she continued, her voice shaking. I lit candles for a child who wasn't gone. I built my faith around a lie. Nia's anger faltered, replaced by something quieter, sadder. And she made you believe it. Yes, Catherine said. And she made you believe you were no one. Nia's eyes filled. Then maybe we were both ghosts in her story. Catherine reached across the sterile space between them and took her hand. Hesitant, trembling, almost unbelieving. Not anymore. 2 days later, the Whitmore mansion was officially sealed. The press flooded the gates. Headlines screamed Whitmore matriarch arrested in baby swap scandal. And heir's daughter found alive after 20 years. But inside the chaos, the true war was not about the news. It was about legacy. The Whitmore empire, their company, their charities, their foundations, all built on the illusion of purity and control, now stood exposed. Every document Margaret had hidden, every deal made to silence the past, was now a weapon in the hands of investigators. For once, truth was louder than money. Catherine sat in her study that evening, the same room where her mother once dictated her every decision. The walls, lined with portraits of Whitmore's past, now looked down with eyes that seemed to question whether she had betrayed the family or finally freed it. On her desk was a single photograph, a young man with a wild smile, her son Richard, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. The picture had been hidden for years, pressed between two sheets of old correspondence. Catherine had found it only after Margaret's arrest, tucked into a book titled The Burden of Bloodlines. Nia knocked softly at the door. "Come in," Catherine said. Nia entered, wearing a simple black sweater. Her hair was pulled back, her expression calm, but her eyes held that same wary strength Catherine had seen in Lorraine years ago. "You found this?" Catherine said, sliding the photograph toward her. Nia picked it up carefully, staring at the faces. "That's my father?" Catherine nodded. "And that's you." Nia traced the faint image of her infant self with trembling fingers. "He looks happy." "He was," Catherine said, smiling through tears, "before he lost her. Before he lost himself." Nia placed the photo down gently. "Do you think he'd recognize me?" Catherine's voice softened. "I think he'd be proud of you." Nia looked up, eyes glistening. "You sound sure." "I am." You faced her, Nia. You looked the devil in the eye and didn't break. That's more courage than most Whitmores ever had. The silence between them wasn't awkward now. It was healing. Then Nia said something that shifted the air entirely. She said something before the police came. Catherine looked up sharply. "Margaret." Nia nodded. "She said she did what she did to protect me." Catherine's expression hardened. "That's a lie." "Maybe," Nia said. "But what if she meant it? What if she thought taking me away was saving me from him? From your son?" Catherine's breath caught. "You think he would have hurt you?" "I don't know," Nia whispered. "But I think everyone in this family has been running from the same thing. The truth that love here always comes with conditions." Catherine sat back, shaken by the precision of the words. She saw herself in the girl, not just by blood, but in spirit. The same fire, the same quiet defiance. "Then maybe," Catherine said slowly, "you'll be the one to end it." A week later, the courthouse steps were crowded. Margaret Whitmore, flanked by her lawyers, made her first public appearance since her arrest. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions she ignored. Catherine stood in the crowd, unnoticed, a scarf covering her hair. Nia stood beside her. The old woman's voice echoed faintly through the air as reporters demanded answers. "Do you feel any remorse, Mrs. Whitmore?" Margaret stopped. For the first time, she looked straight into the lenses. "No," she said. "Remorse is for the weak." The crowd erupted in noise. Nia's chest tightened. "She still thinks she's untouchable." Catherine's voice was quiet but firm. "Not for long." And as Margaret stepped into the courthouse, something almost poetic happened. One of the marble columns cracked, a small fracture running down its side, splitting years of polish and perfection. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The empire was breaking. That evening, Nia visited Lorraine's grave for the first time. The cemetery was quiet, the last light of sunset staining the clouds in amber and rose. She knelt beside the stone, tracing her mother's name with trembling fingers. "Mom," she whispered. "I found them, and I found me." The wind brushed through the grass, soft and forgiving. Catherine stood a few steps back, not wanting to intrude. But Nia turned and gestured for her to come closer. When she did, Nia took her hand and placed it on the grave too. "She was your daughter-in-law," Nia said softly, "whether you admit it or not." Catherine nodded, tears falling freely. "Then I owe her everything." They stood there for a long time, Two generations united not by wealth or pride, but by pain and survival. When they left, the night was clear for the first time in weeks. No thunder, no storm, just the quiet hum of the world finally exhaling. Months passed. The Whitmore mansion was sold. The proceeds went to a foundation, one Nia helped Catherine build, for girls born into systems that erased their origins. It was called the Lorraine Trust, and in the small press conference that marked its opening, Nia stood before the cameras not as a victim, not as an heiress, but as herself. "My name is Nia Lorraine Whitmore," she said, her voice steady. "I grew up believing I was invisible. Now I know invisibility was their weapon, not my truth. So to every girl who's ever been told she was unworthy of her name, or her story, or her place in the world, this is for you. You are not lost. You are not forgotten." The applause was thunderous. Catherine, watching from the front row, could barely keep her tears contained. And somewhere in the back, unseen but felt, the ghost of Lorraine seemed to smile. That night, Nia posted the speech online herself. Within hours, it spread. People shared it not because of her family's scandal, but because of her strength. Comment sections overflowed with stories of lost identity, generational pain, and women who had survived silence. Justice, it turned out, was not just in the arrest of a woman. It was in the voice of the girl she had tried to erase. And as the video faded to black, Nia's voice echoed one last time. Soft but powerful. The perfect close to a story that began with humiliation and ended with healing. If this story moved you, share it. Because the truth deserves witnesses. Subscribe not to my name but to courage. And like this video if you believe some legacies are worth rewriting. So tell me, what would you have done if the truth that could free you could also destroy your family? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to read them. And if this story touched you, share it. Subscribe for the next chapter of courage. And like this video, thank you.